Hello, welcome to Podfic Galore. I'm your horrible online reader, Cold Skythe. I read out loud fanfictions for you busy bees, free of charge and no strings attached. Today I will continue reading the Silmarillion / Lord of the Rings fic by Bloodwing Blackbird from Archive of Our Own, called And Now Each Night I Count the Stars. I hope you can at least try to enjoy my voice, and I will try my best for you with the equipment available to me. Note, this fic is rated explicit. On with the show.
And now each night I count the stars. Chapter 6. It was several months ere Halbarad again met Maglor. It was late summer when the roads were dusty and the fields golden. He had travelled far to the south, hoping for a message from Aragorn, but instead he found Maglor in the Eastmend, among the horsemen of Rohan. They were mustering the herds, and Halbarad stood for a time to watch as they flew across the plains, the flaxen hair of the Rohirrim shining in the sun, but for one, with hair black as raven's wing. Dark, too, were his clothes, and his horse had no saddle. Sharp eyes pinned Halbarad to his spot, even as the riders wheeled like a flock of starlings. Halbarad spent that night at their campfire and listened to the songs of the folk of Rohan. When his gaze met Maglor's across the fading flames, neither looked away. He never sought Maglor out, but he still found him often. They would meet on the road, in the strange hollows of the mountains, where neither had reason to be expected, by the shores of a lake, among the ruins of North Kingdoms. He would find Maglor working in the fields, arms bare and face shaded by a battered straw hat, or curing leather in the stinking tanneries in the shadows of the Blue Mountains. Most memorably was the time, almost a year later, that he found Maglor elbow-deep in a cow, crooning softly to her through a difficult calving. The farmer stood aside, leaning on the fence as he watched. "Quite a thing, ain't it?" he said when Halbarad drew near. "I'd say so." "I tell ye, I'd not be near as calm in her situation." "Was it bad?" "Oh, aye. She was breech, and the cord around a wee one's neck." The farmer shook his head. "She's a good heifer. This is her first. We were ready to lose one or both of them, as she'd not let me close enough to help. Then up walks this fellow, and says he'd like to lend a hand. I didn't reckon on where he'd put it, though." He started to laugh, but it became a cough. "Friend of yours?" he asked when he got his breath again. Halbarad nodded, and would have said more, but the cow moaned, and Maglor whispered something to her. It sounded like the old tongue of the High Elves, but spoken with a strange sort of lisp. With a great wet sound, the calf came, slithering onto the ground where it lay unmoving. Maglor took it in his arms and wiped at its snout. He blew into the calf's nose, and when it jerked and wriggled against him, he fell back onto his rump, laughing, heedless of the slime and blood. Halbarad startled at the sound, like silver, like stars, and the hairs on his forearms stood on end. He must have made some sound, for Maglor was aware of him then. He laid the calf before its mother and stroked her forehead, then came to speak to the farmer. "Well, I'm right grateful of you," said the farmer, "but I reckon you understand if I'm not keen to shake your hand just yet. There's a pump over yonder. Come get me from the stables when you're done. The wife will want to feed you before you move on." The old man nodded at Halbarad and limped away. The farm was just outside of the Shire, south of the South Farthing. It was a small place, little more than a muddy paddock and a small flock of ducks that waddled quickly away as Maglor made his way to the pump. He stripped off his tunic, down to the cloth that bound about his chest, and gestured for Halbarad to assist. Halbarad worked the handle while Maglor wet the garment and used it to bathe his face and arms. Halbarad thought he looked wilder than he had before. He had taken the trinkets that had been given to them by the children of Archet and strung them on cords which he carried like charms at his belt. The smaller things he had tied into his braids, where they tapped softly against each other when he moved. Halbarad could see the glint of the copper coin which he had purchased his knife. It seemed that he had acquired more trinkets, feathers, a songbird skull, a few shells. It suited him in a strange sort of way, a bird carrying his bower with him. "Dare I ask where you learned the skill?" Halbarad asked. "There's little enough skill, except maybe in listening to the creature. We kept horses at the gap, though, if that's a better answer. It is not so different with them." He wrung the water from his tunic and pulled it back over his head, still wet, clinging to his skin, warm and brown in the late summer sun. Which way do you go, Turamundo? Halbarad paused to parse the name, then laughed. Great bull! I haven't forgotten your dancing. Very well, Blackbird. He reached out without thinking and touched the copper coin. Or should I call you Magpie? Makler was very still for a long moment, and Halbarad, abashed, let the coin fall. I'll make it for Weathertop. I'd expect to meet with Gandalf and Aragorn there. And you? I have no destination in mind. If you bide a moment while I greet the good wife, I may be able to pay my way. She promised me a loaf of her baking. He smiled faintly, but did not meet Halbarad's eyes. Halbarad lingered near the line of tangled trees that marked the edge of the property and awaited Makler. He thought perhaps he could smoke a pipe to pass the time, but when he patted his pockets and then searched his pack, he could not find it. In any case, it was not long before Makler joined him. He carried a loaf of bread and a sack of apples, which he had made into a bindle and tied to the hook of the black glaive. He shaded his face with the same tatty straw hat that Halbarad had seen him with before, now decorated with feathers and bits of ribbon. They did not return to the road, instead planning to strike straight east to cross the Baranduin at Sodden Ford, and then cut north through the Downs. The rangers kept watch at the ford so they could gain news in addition to shortening their road. Evening was already falling as they approached the ford, the sunlight golden and dusty with late summer's heat, and though the river was low, the far bank was a churn of mud, as if someone had recently crossed with a wagon and a team of horses. In front of him, Makler froze, staring into the trees, and Halbarad could see the change in his bearing as he readied himself for an attack. Peace, Halbarad whispered. They're of my people. Makler nodded, but did not relax. Halbarad watched as two shadows peeled themselves from the trees and approached. Well met, Halbarad, cried one, a man with grey in his beard and a twinkle in his eye, followed closely by a tall woman a few years Halbarad's junior. Almiron, it's good to see you again. They clasped hands, and he turned to the other. And you, Aglaril, how fare you? Well enough, she said, sheathing her sword. The greatest risk this year has been an early death from boredom. That is good to hear. Oh, aye, agreed Almiron. You young folk are too eager. Give me a quiet posting any day. Maglar spoke. Someone came through before us. Aglaril looked at him, but spoke to Halbarad. He's right. That was unusual. They look like merchants. Big folk, as they'd say in these parts. The boxes looked like pipewood to me, said Almiron. I think I saw the hornblower's mark. It would not have been so strange along the east-west road, but it was rare to see any trade leaving the Shire to the south. It was hardly the sort of thing they were usually on the alert for, but strange business was strange business. Come, said Aglaril. We've a camp set up nearby. She glanced again at Maklar, but led them along the river bank. The camp was a sandy spot, ringed around by thick underbrush that hid it from the road. Had it not been for the pleasant voice of the river, it would have been a bleak and cheerless place. What news of you, Halbarad? Asked Almiron as they set down their things. We had heard that you picked up a stray last year, but I thought not that he'd still be trailing you so long after. The old ranger looked over Halbarad's shoulder and gave a sharp nod. Halbarad looked back to see Maklar staring at Almiron, his face unreadable. He leaned his spear against the tree and stalked to the water's edge. Almiron grinned at Halbarad's expression, but quickly sobered, lowering his voice. Can he be trusted? I believe so, but you must make your own judgment. He went to join Maklar. There was a time no one would have spoken thus of me, Maklar remarked, as a breeze from the river stirred the hot air. He meant no offense. This was a lie. Almiron had almost certainly intended to be overheard. You misunderstand. It is a relief to me to find that men, even you descendants of Númenor, have almost forgotten us. He looked at Halbarad then and grinned. It was a startling look on his thin face, white and showing all of his teeth. Make no mistake, I will kill him if he speaks so to me again. Still smiling, he went back to help the rangers build a fire. They shared a dinner of fish fresh from the river, accompanied by Maklor's bread and some of the apples, then settled themselves to talk. Rangers were always eager for gossip. It came from being so spread out. Maklor took a seat next to Halbarad, where he listened, playing his harp softly, as was his habit in the evenings. Before long, they had shared all the news that was of the north and the borders of the small lands they guarded. "What have you?" Aklari asked, turning to Maklor. "Surely you have traveled somewhere more exciting than this." "I have, although much of it does not warrant telling." "Were you not in Lorien?" Halbarad asked, recalling what he had been told of the terms of Maklor's release. "Indeed. I came here as soon as I was released by the Lady of the Galadrim." "Released?" asked Aklari. "You make it sound like you were her captive." "Every year he travels to Lothlorien to visit with the lady," Halbarad explained. Maklor snorted. "It sounds far more congenial in your telling." "How is it, then?" asked Almiron. "The Lady Galadriel is my cousin." Halbarad found himself chewing at his thumbnail. "Let us say only that there is now little love left between the two of us. I visit her as a condition of my freedom, and she accepts me because she thinks that Elrond trusts me overmuch." "Does he?" "It seems likely." He plucked a final chord, then set the harp aside, letting the melody hang unresolved. "When I reach the borders of Lothlorien, I am bound and blindfolded by the people of the wood, and I am led before her. When she is satisfied, I am again led beyond the borders. I still have not seen a Malorn." Halbarad thought he sounded almost mournful at this, but before he could be swayed to sympathy, Maklor pulled a pipe from his pocket, filled it, lit it, and began to smoke. "That's my pipe!" For it was, and not his old spare pipe, which he had given to the elf more than a year before. It was his pipe, the one that he had sought since leaving the farm. "It is," said Maklor, exhaling a perfect smoke ring. "I think your cousin has the right of it," Halbarad remarked, stalking over and attempting to snatch the pipe from Maklor, to Aglaril's laughter. "You are a scoundrel!" "And a thief, do not forget!" Maklor leapt away from him and secreted the pipe on his person. He held out his hands, innocent, and bowed. "Come, Halbarad, you are too easily dissuaded." Halbarad crouched and dove forward, catching Maklor about the waist and bowling him over. The skirmish was brief, but Halbarad had more strength, and it did not take long for him to gain the upper hand, pinning Maklor to the ground, smell of crushed grass thick in his nose. "I win. You must give me my pipe." "Oh. Tell me, Halbarad, are you fond of your liver?" Halbarad looked down at the glint of a knife in Maklor's hand, held a mere inch from his right side. It was his own knife. Maklor shifted and lifted his head enough to murmur in Halbarad's ear. "Do you concede?" Halbarad huffed a laugh and rolled off of him. "Give me my knife back, at least." "Of course." In the morning, Halbarad bade farewell to his kinsfolk and followed Maklor across the river. They followed the road at first, wishing to see which way the wagon had traveled. Away from the river, though, the road was hard and dry beneath their feet, and even the heavy wagon left little clear mark. Still, though, it was simple enough to see that it had continued south along the Greenway. They paused near the crossroad to rest, and there, after a long and surreal argument in which Maklor somehow invoked both the fall of Gondolin and the trickster myth from Harad in his own defense, and Halbarad delivered no few insincere threats, he reclaimed his pipe. Pleased with his triumph, he settled down to smoke as Maklor found himself a perch on a rock. "Did you truly come here immediately from Lorien?" Halbarad asked. "I did," said Maklor, lighting his own borrowed pipe. "Why?" Maklor shrugged, straightening the horrible hat and exhaling a long stream of smoke. "I thought perhaps that I would find you near." Halbarad had been surprised many times since he had met Maklor, but never more than he was at this moment. "I know that I am not a pleasant companion, Halbarad," Maklor said. "I'll trouble you no more if you wish me gone." Halbarad did not know what to say to this, so he moved from his place and came to sit beside Maklor. He held out one of his hands open, palm up, but made no other move. "I do not lie, Blackbird. I called you my friend, and I meant it." They sat close enough now that he could hear Maklar's sharp breath. Halbarad was beginning to repent his forwardness when Maklar reached out and grasped his hand, squeezing tightly, near tight enough to hurt, but he said nothing. Halbarad thought he understood. There was no barrow on the South Downs, but it was still empty and cheerless place to traverse. The summer had been dry and the grass was brown and sharp beneath their boots. They saw no animals other than an eagle circling high above them. Maklar was troubled, stopping frequently to stare at the bird or sniffing the air which hung hot and oppressive over the hills. "What do you see?" asked Halbarad. "Nothing. I see nothing. I hear nothing. I do not like this place. There is nowhere to hide." Despite the heat, he drew his cloak close about himself. Halbarad too was uneasy, so he kept pace as Maklar hurried over the next hill, although the hunted look in his companion's face had a greater part in his concern than did something which they could neither see nor hear. That night they camped in the downs, though Maklar would have had them walk through the night if Halbarad had allowed it. They built no fire and had no music. The heat had somehow grown even after the end of the day. The weather was overcast and there were no stars to be seen. Halbarad had been sleeping fitfully, and when he was woken by a sound, something between a scream and a sob, he was almost relieved. He lay there, staring at the sky as he waited for the shock of the sudden waking to wear off. "I wish a wind would come," he said. Maklar was awake, of course. "Halbarad, do you dream?" "Yes, of course." He rolled onto his side, but it was too dark for him to see anything of his companion's face when the moon was only a faint smear of wan gray behind the clouds. "I'm not sure what you are asking me." "Tell me what you dream of." His voice was somehow empty, like wind through a hollow place. His voice was somehow empty, like a wind through a hollow place. "All sorts of things," he thought for a moment. "Sometimes I dream of things that happened. I dream of my grandfather's house, but in my dreams it is different and has many doors. I dream of my sister, who died when I was a child. I dream that she is not dead, but only sick, and I have forgotten her. I dream of a great city I've never been to. I dream of my death." Maklar stirred. "Are you foresighted?" "I do not know. I shall only find out when it's too late." He hoped that Maklar would ask no more about that. "I also sometimes dream that I'm in a house of Elrond without my clothes." Maklar chuckled, but the sound was as dead as the grass around them. "What do you dream of?" I dream of death. But never my own. I dream of those I love dying by my hand." "Oh. It matters not. I have killed brothers, sisters, sons. What difference does it make that they are not my own?" He sighed. "I see them every night in my dreams, and they all look at me with my brother's eyes." He rolled over to face Halbarad, the shine of his eyes visible even in the darkness. "Sometimes they walk beside me when I wake." I know not what to say. A wind stirred in the grass. Halbarad hoped that it betokened a change in the weather. Maklar rolled to his feet and took up his spear. "Ready your sword, Turamundo." Halbarad obeyed and stood, back to back with Maklar, his eyes straining in the darkness for things he could not see. He could smell them, though, a scent of rot and a heavy resinous sweetness that lingered foul in his nose. Halbarad had no name for the things that stared at them from the darkness. They were creatures of the dark and nameless places, things that fled from the stars and fed on death even as they hungered for life. From the Barrow Downs they must have come, hoping to find two unwary travelers and an easy meal. Tall but stooped they were, vague shadows made of grasping hands and hungry mouths that seemed to dissolve when he struck at them. But their hands were somehow solid as they grasped and tore at his hair and held it to his clothes like iron. He felt himself being dragged away into darkness somehow deeper than the night. He could see nothing, could hear nothing, and it was somehow cold, and he shivered even as the sweat rolled ticklish down his sides, like a man in the grip of fever. And then there was something over his face, and he could not breathe. There was a great cry, then, something almost like a song, and the wind stirred again, rolling away the clouds. With it, the shadows that held fast to him were gone, leaving only the smell of smoke and a taste of metal in his throat. The hands that held him were warm and alive, and the moon shone brightly down on them. Makor smiled at him, the light of the stars reflected in his eyes. Say, Halparan, that you hope they never leave me. They slept the rest of the night in peace, and woke to find no more sign of the creatures but a burnt patch in the grass. End of chapter 6. Stay tuned.